Hello and welcome to the Easy Finance channel. Here we're making complicated things simple. Today I suggest having a look at the difference between constant payment and even principal loan redemption schemes. Let us start with a simple example first. So we've got a loan with the initial amount outstanding of $150,000 at the annual rate of 12% for 2 years with monthly payments, which results in a total number of payments of 24. Well, the first thing to do is to make up those cash flows. As we are going further to use the built-in function here, the software function, the number of each payment must be between 0 and the total number of those payments. So the first payment, or the first month, is called month number 0. So, thus, to have 24 payments totally, so we need the last one to have number 23. That's just the requirement of the software. Well, obviously nothing to do with that. So as for the even principle, to begin with, as it seems to be slightly less complicated, so let us give it a name. So principal part of the payment. Well, as you know, any payment for that loan, any kind of debt, is comprised of two parts. So a partial redemption of the principal and payment of interest. So we're going to start with the first one, obviously. So the thing we are talking about is called even principal. So even principal, so let's give that a name. So that means that the principal part should be evenly distributed all over the lifetime of that loan, which is quite an easy thing to do. So that means that 150,000 should be just divided by 24, so the number of those payments we've got. So that as a result, we are going to pay $6,250 each month, redeeming the principal part. That's quite simple. As for the interest, there are two ways to calculate it. I'm going to start with slightly more complicated one, and then we're going to use the embedded function. So for better understanding of what's going on there, so let us first calculate the amount outstanding, so which is left after each part of the principal is redeemed. Well, definitely at the very beginning, the outstanding amount is completely equal to the notional value of that loan of $150,000. So by the beginning of the first month, well, I mean the one called first, well, generally that's the second one, the amount outstanding should be less by the amount that will have already been paid in the first month, right? So we can easily calculate that, and that's going to be just the difference between 150,000 and 6,250. So, and the same for all those payments. So finally, at the beginning of the 23rd, we've got $6,850 left to pay, and that's exactly the amount paid in that particular month. So that at the end of those 24 payments, after the principal will have already been paid, so the loan is completely redeemed, right? And now we can easily calculate the interest. So the interest is based upon the outstanding amount always. So that's a really important thing here. You are not supposed to pay for money you don't have. So you never pay for what you've already paid back to the lender. That's the point. So that's for the first month, we've got 12% annual rate. That should be definitely adjusted for the number of months in a year, which is 12, and multiplied by the outstanding amount. So thus we are supposed to pay $1,500 in the first month. So let us fix some of those values, well, generally the annual rate, and we'll definitely fill in that column. That's completely clear that as the outstanding amount declines as a result of that principal payment, the interest payment declines as well. So that's the way to calculate it. Another way to get those values, well, which is comparatively easier, is using an embedded function. So it's called ISPMT. So let me show you. That returns the interest paid during both specific period of an investment. As those input variables, we definitely need the rate, so which is 12%, and as you can see, that should be also adjusted for the frequency of those payments within a year. As for the number of that payment period, so generally that's 0, and in this particular function, the value must be between 0 and the total number of those payments. So the number of payments is 24, so that's quite obvious. And the present value, so the notional amount outstanding, is quite well known, so $150,000. That function returns a negative value for an outflow fund, so that's what we pay. That's why we've got that negative value. And well, generally that's quite clear that those values are well completely identical to what we've already calculated. So it was done just to show you what that function does, so how it works. Well, generally that's quite obvious. Alright, so now we can calculate the total payment each month. Well, we've already mentioned that that's comprised of the principal and the interest. So that's why we pay $7,750 in the first month, and then the amount of the total payment declines as the outstanding amount declines, and in turn interest declines. So that's why we pay $7,750 in the first month and $6,312.50 in the latest one, right? Well, we can easily calculate the sum of those payments to calculate so-called effective rate. So that's completely clear that we've paid $168,750 for that loan of $150,000. So what we pay to the lender is definitely the difference. So that's what we pay for using that money, right? So we need the difference of $18,750, and now we can easily calculate the so-called effective rate. So we need the difference, so that should be definitely divided by 150,000, so the notional amount. And besides that, so it makes sense to divide it by 2, because we need the annual effective rate. So we've paid those slightly more than 18,000 in 2 years, but we need a 1 year effective rate, right? So let us turn that into percentage. So yeah, percentage. And well, finally that results in a value of 6.25% of the cost. So that's what we pay, well, so-called, well, effectively pay for that loan. Alright, so generally we are pretty much done with that even principle. So let us, well, highlight it with some color, so that will be more obvious. But now we are going to move on to that constant payment approach. So let us call that constant payment, right? Well, as for the number of the payments, so we are going to use the values we already have. As for principal, interest, and total, so those are the things we are going to calculate now. So the payment approach stands for the fact that the total payment, so let us copy that here, so the total payment is equal for each of those payments, unlike in the previous case. So there is a function for that purpose, so called PMT, so that returns the value of each payment. Those variables are pretty much the same as in the previous case, so we need the rate, which should also be adjusted for the frequency, so the number of payments of 24, the present value, so which is the amount outstanding, the initial amount outstanding. So as for the future value, so that's the amount outstanding at the end of all that redemption of the loan. So in this particular case, that should be 0. So we are supposed to completely redeem the whole debt. So that's why we've got 0 there. And as for the type, so generally if we pay at the beginning of the period, so that should be 1. If we pay at the end, so that should be equal to 0. In the previous case, we calculated for the second type, well, generally for the payment at the end of each month. So that's why, for the sake of comparability, we need 0 as well. So let us turn that into, well, general format. The function returns that value in the monetary format, as a standard. Generally, that, well, doesn't really matter for our purposes now. So thus we've got the total payment of $7,061.02 so each month, and that's exactly the same, unlike in the previous case. So that's the difference. So that's the first difference here. So that the total value is exactly the same. And well, generally that's already quite obvious that in the first month we would pay less if there was a constant payment approach applied, right? But as for the latest month, so we would pay more compared to that even principal. And further, you'll see what impact it has on the price of money, finally, so on that effective rate, and so why we pay more or less depending on that approach applied, right? So as for the total, so generally that's already calculated. So as for the effective rate, well, generally we can calculate it even now. But first I suggest having a look at the principal and interest distribution. So that would make things more obvious. Let us start with principal here. So there is a function for that purpose, so that's called PMT. So that stands for, well, generally the principal payment. All the variables are pretty much the same, so well, I don't think we should spend too much time discussing that, so that's completely clear. As for the number of the payment period, so here's, well, quite a substantial difference we've got. That should be in the range of 1 to the number of periods. So generally it's not, well, it should not start with 0 but with 1. So that's why here we would add 1 to meet the requirements of that function. Well, as for the number, well, that's still 24, of course. So the present value is the same. Well, as for the future value, of course, we're going to completely redeem that loan and pay at the end of the month, well, like in the previous case. Again, let us turn that into the general format and fill in that table. As for the principal, so now we can make some conclusions as well. So that's completely obvious that we pay more principal in that even principal approach. So $6,850 is definitely more than $5,561. So that means that the amount outstanding would decline slower if the constant payment is used. So thus, as the outstanding amount declines slower, we've got that interest calculated for a larger sum. So that's why we're going to pay more interest in that constant payment approach. So let us check if that works. So interest, right? So we need interest. So there is, well, again, a function for that purpose. So that's called IPMT. so not ISPMT but IPMT. So that will returns that for constant payments. Well, as for the variables, that's again pretty easy thing to do. So the same with the number of those payments. So 1 should be added. Please don't forget about it. So as for the number of total payments, well, that's definitely 24. So we've got the present value, well, future value is again 0, and the same for the time. So again, let us turn that into general format and fill in that table. So yep, it should be like that. Alright, so that's completely clear that in the first month we paid the same interest. Well, that makes sense, because that outstanding amount has not yet declined due to the previous payments of the principal, because we have not paid anything yet. But further, those interest payments turned out to be slightly higher compared to that even principal approach. So, well, for example, let us have a look at some month, well, whatever, number 10. So that's the line here. The total amount for constant payment is less, but the interest part is different. So in that even principal approach, we would pay $875 of interest, and as for constant payment, that amount will be $918. So we pay more of that interest in that constant payment approach. And that definitely has, well, a certain result. So you can see that we would have paid $169,464 for the same amount. Thus, the difference would be slightly different. So yes, well, of course, we need some change, well, some adjustments here. So for those calculations, that's for sure. Yep. Something went wrong. Yeah, of course. So it should be negative. Yeah. So generally, that means that we've paid $19,464.5 for the same amount. So we pay more in this particular case. So let us calculate the effective rate and tell the difference. So, well, again, we should divide it by the initial amount outstanding. That's for sure, and divide it by 2, so to get that annual rate. So let us do this and turn that into percentage. And now that's completely clear and completely obvious. So in the case of, so whatever color it should be, or like green, whatever. The effective rate turns out to be 6.25 for even principal and 6.49 for the constant payment. So the interesting thing here is that depending on that loan redemption scheme, the effective rate differs even for the loan with for the loans with completely identical notional amounts, identical annual rates, and identical number of payments. Quite an interesting thing to have a look at. Thank you.